Good evening. It is 7. I'm sorry. Are we ready?
We're ready.
Okay. It is 7 p.m. on Thursday, September 24th. This is a regular meeting of the governing body of the city of Spring Hill, Kansas. Our first order of business, as always, is our invocation. We are pleased to have with us Pastor Joel Atwell from Grace Community Church. Those of you who wish to, please stand and join us in prayer. Pastor, you have the floor.
Our Father, we take just a moment to pause and to recognize who you are as Creator God. You spoke the world into existence. God who is endlessly powerful, endlessly loving, and endlessly good. Father, the truth is that sometimes we're always desperately in need of you, but sometimes we're more acutely aware of it than others. And in our world these days, we are acutely aware of the brokenness that surrounds us and how desperately we need you and your goodness and your wholeness. We pray for our world, oh God. We pray for healing from this crazy virus. We pray for healing from racial injustice and all the unrest that surrounds that whole conversation. We pray for your healing and your help in every aspect of our lives. God, tonight we pray in particular for your wisdom, for these whom you have allowed to be placed in positions of leadership in our community. We pray that you'll give them character of integrity and hearts that long to do what's good and right, and give them wisdom and direction and help. We pray for our community, God, during these days. We thank you, and we just call upon your name. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor. If you'd continue to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Leeton,
Here.
Mr. Owen,
Here.
Mr. Graves,
Here.
Mr. Eckert,
Present.
Mrs. Hughes. Here. Mayor, we do have a quorum present.
All right, thank you very much. I do have one requested addition to the agenda, and that is a proclamation for National 4-H Week. I would like to take that up after citizen participation. Does the council have any requested additions or deletions?
Mayor, move to approve the agenda as revised.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0-0. Excuse me. This takes us to citizen participation. This is an opportunity in the meeting for residents to address the council on items not already on the agenda. Anyone wishing to do so, we just ask that you step up to the lectern, state your name and address for the record, and then you'll have the council's attention. Mr. Peterman, welcome.
Thank you. I just want to ask, a month ago I asked the question, how much land does the city own that is leased to farmers? How much an acre do we get for that land? Where's that land at? And where does this show as income on the city records? And I think your comment was that someone was supposed to get with me before the next meeting, 2 weeks later.
And did that happen?
No.
Okay. Mr. Hendershot?
I have that information, sir.
Okay, do you have it available now?
I can, after the meeting, I can get it, yes.
Terrific. Let's get that posted online.
Yes,
And
sir.
then I would like you to visit with Mr. Peterman after the meeting briefly and just make sure that we've hit all of the points, okay? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. The floor remains open.
Steve Boswell, 504 North Jackson. I was online with citizens of Spring Hill the other day, and there were some comments about the chickens, obviously. And I just wanted to see if we had been doing any type of looking into that, or what was going on with the request for the chickens.
Mr. Hendershot, has that been a discussion item with the Planning Commission?
I would defer to Chief Henson. She's been spearheading that with, along with community development, so.
Okay. Chief Henson or Mr. Burton, whomever. Is that your only question, Mr. Boswell?
Yes, sir.
Okay, if you don't mind sitting down, then Chief can come up to the lectern. We're having some microphone shortages, so this way we make sure those watching online can hear.
The update on the chickens is that Officer Sisson and Will Mallory from Community Development, they're leading the discussion with the students. They met in August. They are putting together guidelines to address the questions and discussion items. I don't know if they have a secondary meeting already met, but as soon as I can find that out, we can let you know on the secondary meeting.
Terrific, excellent progress. Thank you very much. The floor remains open. Hearing none, we'll go ahead and close that portion of the program, and we'll move on to the proclamation. We have representatives here tonight from both Spring Hill Rustlers and Sharon 4-H, and I understand that there are a couple of children in the audience who have a last name very familiar and perhaps consistent with somebody on my right. So, Mr. Eckert, I'm going to ask you if you'll join me down here. We'll read this proclamation together, and then I'm going to ask our 4-Hers to come up as well. We'd like to get some pictures with you. It's going to be a little bit challenging to get one single picture. Excellent. Welcome and welcome. Whereas 4-H, the nation's largest youth development and empowerment organization, cultivates confident kids who tackle the issues that matter most in their communities right now. I'm sorry?
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I thought, did you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Whereas 4-H is a commitment by parents to become involved in their children's lives during a critical time of growth and understanding themselves and the world they live in. And whereas 4-H is a commitment by youth to become involved in assisting their own growth and understanding of themselves, their family, and their work. And whereas 4-H is a commitment by the community through the extension system to assist parents and youth while they grow individually and together in understanding themselves and their world. And whereas National 4-H Week celebrates the great things that 4-H offers young people and highlights the incredible 4-H youth in the community who work each day to make a positive impact in their community. Now, therefore, I, Steve Ellis, Mayor of the City of Spring Hill, do hereby proclaim October 4th through the 10th, 2019 as National 4-H Week in the city of Spring Hill, Kansas. While I ask the city clerk to sign these so we can get a copy to each of you, I'm going to put you guys on the spot. There's a camera right behind me. We're live streaming. You guys are about to be YouTube stars. Tell us, let's start with you guys. What are some of the things that you're working on?
We're working on trying to get our last meeting. We did elections for roles in the club, president,
Good.
historian, and health and safety.
Okay,
officer.
good. Good. What about some of your individual projects? What are you working on?
Well, some projects for sure that I have been working on is arts and crafts and ceramics and like woodworking and stuff like that.
Fantastic. How about you?
Home environment where it's like furniture and you can take a piece of furniture and redo it and make it your own. So working on that, and I've been working on art pieces.
Terrific. What's it like to have tangible skills? I have none. How about you gentlemen? What have you been working on?
Well, we've really been working on the same thing about
getting your officers elected? And good. How about some individual projects?
We've been doing rocketry, ceramics, and food.
Terrific, terrific. And Dad, are you just about as proud as you can be?
Proud of the peacock.
Outstanding. Do you have folks here? You guys have your parents here? Can I ask them to stand up? I'm going to ask everybody to give these kids and these parents a round of applause. Any time that we can engage youth in our community, the world becomes a little nicer place. So thank you for what you do. I'm going to get these from the clerk. I know each of your organizations like to have a copy of it. On behalf of the city of Spring Hill, we are very proud of each of you. Congratulations. We're not allowed to shake hands anymore, so. You guys can go ahead and have a seat. Thank you. All right, this takes us to our consent agenda.
Mayor, move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0-0. This takes us to the first of our formal council action items, consideration of ordinance number 2020-15. This is a rezoning rural residential to C2. Mr. Burton, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council and citizens. This is a formal action for ordinance 2020-15. It's a rezoning. It's Z 24-2020. The request is south of 199th and west of Webster. It's from RUR to C2. Prairie Star Development, Greg Prieb, they had rezoned and preliminary development planned, about 60 acres there, if you recall, with some apartments and commercial along Webster. This property is the ranch home and the barn out back that was for sale. And Prairie Star was able to purchase it after apparently some other purchase had fallen through or something. So what they've incorporated this into their overall development plan. But first step is well annexation, which you did last couple of meetings ago. And now the rezoning from an RUR to a C2. The remainder of the property was rezoned about 6-7 months ago to C2 and then an RP4 in the western part of it for the apartment complex. It's 5.1 acres, and the Planning Commission did approve it. The 14-day protest period has passed with no protest petitions or calls been received by staff or city clerk. The alternatives are to approve it, override the Planning Commission by a 3-2, or remand it back to the Planning Commission, denial or continuance. Mr. Jenkins has reviewed the draft ordinance. There's no impact, and the Spring Hill Planning Commission and staff recommend approval of it.
What was the ordinance number if it was approved?
15.
15.
Yes.
Mayor, move to approve ordinance number 2020-15.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
One question, good sir. Is this all frontage property to Webster that is getting rezoned to 5.1 acres?
Yes, that is correct.
Very good.
Any other questions? All right. This is an ordinance. We'll vote by roll. It's a rezoning. Madam Clerk, if you would call the roll of the governing body, please.
Mr. Owen?
Aye.
Mr. Graves?
Aye.
Mrs. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Leeton?
Yes.
Mr. Eckert?
Yes.
Mayor Ellis?
Yes, ordinance carries 600.
Thank you.
Very much. Next item is consideration of ordinance 2020-16. This has to do with golf carts. Mr. Jenkins, you're presenting, I see.
Mayor, members of the council, this is the ordinance that would authorize golf cart operations within the city of Spring Hill. This matter's been up before you, I think, at least 2 times, gone over and made some changes in accordance with the direction of the city council. You have on the dais a revised ordinance, which is only technically changed in form, no substantive changes. With respect to the ordinance itself, I know you've been through this, but I'm just going to give you a quick overview of some of the 6 key points. One, it only operates with respect to vehicles that would be 25 miles or less in speed. It operates for streets, alleys, and roads. You're required to have the same insurance that other persons have to have with respect to automobiles. You cannot operate the cart on interstate highways, federal highways, state highways. Number 5, can cross streets, alleys, and roads that have greater than 25 miles per hour posted, but you cannot cross federal, state, public highways. 6, can operate on private property as long as you have the consent of the property owner. With respect to some issues that have come up regarding other matters, first of all, the same traffic laws apply to the golf carts that would be applied to other vehicles such as UI or open containers. Secondly, with respect to the HOAs, they could adopt covenants that would be more restrictive, but not less restrictive than state law. Thirdly, with respect to penalties, the judge would be able to adopt a amended fee resolution, which would make this a traffic infraction. State statute would applies, and that would be a $75 fine. The last thing that was raised is whether or not this would be burdensome upon the police department. And with respect to that issue, I defer to the chief if you'd like to hear from her on that matter.
Yeah, I would.
Wasn't sure. With regard to whether it would have additional burden on law enforcement, we don't believe it will. We have currently golf carts driving our streets now, and we don't necessarily anticipate an influx of illegal drivers than we already have now. So it is still a complaint-driven and/or on-view type enforcement action. And based on the previous discussions and information I obtained from the cities who had legalized golf carts, they did not see necessarily an uptick in complaints or accidents.
And Mr. Jenkins, just for clarification for everybody, by making these traffic violations, they are in fact potentially moving violations that impact one's driver's license.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that.
Yeah. It wouldn't be a mandatory court date. It could be a mail-in fee. if you
Right,
chose. Yeah.
right. No, I understand. Unless, of course, it were a DUI or.
Right, right. And that's a whole nother matter.
Right, yes, we don't do mail-ins for those.
Yeah.
All right, any questions for Chief Henson or for Mr. Jenkins? Before we get started then on the vote, I just wanted to thank Carol Thomas, who has reached out on a couple of different occasions with some very thoughtful questions. She served on our broadband task force, she serves on our Parks Advisory Board, and she has been very engaged in this, very clearly saying she's not on one side or the other, but she's brought up, I think, some fantastic questions. So I wanted to thank Carol for her engagement in this process. Would entertain a motion?
Do it? You want me to? Okay. Do we have a, ordinance number 2020, what?
Dash 16.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve ordinance number 2020-16.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? If not, it is an ordinance. We'll vote by roll. Madam Clerk, if you would call the roll of the council, please.
Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mrs. Hughes?
Yes.
Mr. Leeton?
No.
Mr. Eckert?
Yes.
Mr. Owen?
Yes.
Ordinance carries 410. Next item is consideration of Resolution 2020-R-18 Parks Master Plan. Mr. Hendershot, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening. Over the course of the past several months, city staff and our Parks Advisory Board has been working with Verio, our contractor, on an update of our Parks Master Plan. And as you'll recall, at the last meeting, there was a presentation about that Parks Master Plan. The plan serves to develop a community-supported comprehensive plan that provides guidance to the Parks Department and Recreation Commission for the next 10 years. The plan sets out to prioritize demands and opportunities and generate a strategic action plan and guide policy development. Moreover, the plan will create a clear set of goals and objectives, providing direction to the City Council, Parks Department staff, and the Recreation Commission. In August of 2020, the Parks Advisory Board was provided a final draft and overview of the Parks Master Plan. This concluded with the board recommendation to unanimously accept the 2020 Spring Hill Parks Master Plan and recommend adoption by the governing body. And in your package, you had a copy of that recommendation letter. There is a resolution that has been proposed and drafted as number 2020-R-18. It is staff and the Spring Hill Parks Advisory Board recommendation to adopt Resolution 2020-R-18, adopting the 2020 Spring Hill Parks Master Plan. With that, I'd answer any questions.
Did I miss one?
One's an ordinance, one's a resolution. Do they go in numbers or do they split out from those
No,
differences?
the resolutions have a different numbering system.
They're separate.
Yeah.
So 18.
Yeah.
Mayor, I move to approve resolution number 2020-R-18.
A second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 500.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item is consideration of a request from developer for reducing administrative costs, Dayton Creek, Special Benefit District Number 4, PV Investments. Ms. Landis, you have the floor.
Thank you. The petition for the Dayton Creek Special Benefit District Number 4 was accepted by the City Council in October of last year. The benefit district petition amount represents a maximum dollar amount for the district, which is proposed by the developer, and it requires the developer to contribute additional dollars towards the construction of the infrastructure for the platted area included in the benefit district. The dollar amount available for construction under the petition is determined by a formula, which is we take the total petition amount, we subtract out the expenditures that will come by contract or are an amount that the city would be contributing to the project for the benefit district, and the amount that's left over is what's contributed by the developer. Kansas statute states that the procedures for an improvement district and under the section D of that same statute allows for the inclusion of administration fee not to exceed 5% of the total cost of an improvement or the cost of work done by the city to reimburse the city for the services rendered by the city in the administration and supervision of such improvements. That's a quote from the statute. The city has inconsistently applied administration fees across benefit districts in the past, and in most districts, the administrative fee ranges between 2.5% and 3% in those districts that we have applied. The proposal that you have in your packet this evening is from the developer, which is PV Investments for Dayton Creek. And the request is to reduce the administrative fee for this district specifically from the calculated 3% that we've included in our calculations to determine how much construction dollars would be contributed by the developer, from that 3% to about 50% of that amount, so a 1.5% fee instead. The 3% that's included in there is $65,400, and that averages about $3,270 per year to manage that benefit district over the span of 20 years, which is what the length of the benefit district. The cost that the city has in administering a benefit district includes annual fees for licensing of the software that we use to track every parcel within that benefit district, and then also bill and certify to the county each year, as well as any unknown administrative or legal expenses that may arise over the course of the assessment period. So any legal expenses that or questions by participants in the district that might come up, those kinds of expenses are what are to be covered by the admin fee. The request came in and was reviewed by our city's bond counsel, our municipal attorney, and our municipal advisor. And the current benefit district policy does not specifically state what a recommended administrative fee is. So we know that the allowable fee is the 5%, but we don't have it stated in our current policy exactly what the city is going to contribute. I did look around a little bit at other cities just to give you an example. There are, not every city does benefit districts. In fact, not every city in our local area does benefit districts, but some of the larger ones do. Locally, Olathe charges 4%, Derby charges 5%, Lenexa charges 5%. So I did not have a chance to get in touch with Wichita or Manhattan. They also have benefit districts. The request that was put in front of you is to consider reducing the fee by the 50% that is requested by the developer to, I guess, hold tight on the 3% that's already included, or to table the issue. The staff's recommendation is that the council consider applying the administration fee to cover the cost of future administration of the benefit district equal to 3% or $65,400. And we do have a representative for the developer here in the audience if you would like to ask any questions of the developer. I'm available as well.
Mr. Holland?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Curtis Holland. I'm the attorney for the developer, and I don't have a lot more to add to what was indicated by Ms. Landis, as well as what was referenced in our letter. I think you have a copy of the letter in the packet. I do want to indicate to you that Mr. Vince, or Dr. Vince, who's the developer, couldn't be here. He'd like to have been here, but he's having some health issues. However, he wanted me to let you know that he sincerely appreciates the participation and cooperation the city has in terms of its support of Dayton Creek. It's still, it's a fantastic project, but it's still, struggling. It's in the red, and so he's trying to look for any potential savings that he can, and so he was hoping that, I know this is a discretionary issue, and the fee isn't always applied. For some reason, it is being applied in this particular case, and he's asking for some relief in that regard. So with that, I'm here to answer any questions. Thank you.
One question I have is if everybody feels like they've really had enough time to dig into this and contemplate, and if not, we can certainly table it, other than taking it up right now, or if everybody feels like they've had the opportunity to investigate.
I'm good. You can stay there.
Ready to proceed? Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Certainly, go right ahead, Ms. Hughes.
Melanie.
Sure.
The request is based upon the scale of savings. So basically, I think my understanding, if I'm correct on this, is they're saying they're doing quite a few benefit districts and they're already putting in a 3% fee on the rest of the benefit districts. And so maybe they could get a reduction in this one. But in my understanding is if they were to have done all the benefit districts together, there still would have been a 3% fee on all of them at one time. The amount would not have gone down for scale. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be right. So, and to be very clear, in districts 1 and 2, the admin fee was not applied in the calculation for the districts. In both districts, the construction was more than or very close to the amount of the petition. And when it was calculated in finance, we did not include an administrative fee. On benefit district 3, a 3% or 2.5% was included. On this one, it was a 3%. When it was calculated, that's the number that was thrown in there. So if that's the, that to kind of show you where we haven't necessarily been static on applying it across the board. And when we do move ahead with a new policy update, we want to make sure that we kind of identify those areas where we can win and how we might apply those percentages going forward. So.
I do have one question if you're done. On this admin fee, it's for the life of this benefit district, which is
Yes.
20 years. So there's no point if something happened that we can go back and raise that fee.
No, because
We're
this
fixed at 3% for the life of this, right?
it's 3% of the total amount, and that's all the city gets out of that benefit district, and that should cover or is supposed to cover
Okay.
anything that you might see in the future for that 20 years.
Okay, good.
And that also has to account for time value of money over time. So that 3%, I mean, I don't think is an unreasonable amount.
Yeah.
So, yeah, any more questions?
I'm good.
Okay. Mayor, I move to deny the request for PV investments for the administrative fee of 3%.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor? You're in favor of the negative.
Yeah.
So, those in favor?
We're all.
Aye.
Motion carries 500. Mr. Holland, we appreciate where you were coming from. We appreciate the work of Dr. Vance. I think what the council's looking at is the consistent application and ensuring that we're protecting the taxpayers. So, with that, Ms. Landis, thank you for your guidance on this as well.
Thank you.
All right, this takes us to the first of 3 discussion items, and the first one is city annexation policy. Mr. Leeton, you were going to lead us off in that discussion.
Yeah, I requested this to be added, for the reason is that, in a meeting with Mr. Hendershot and with Mr. Owen, I had a discussion with Mr. Hendershot about the 199th Street and the annexations, what's occurring with Gardner. At the last meeting, Mr. Eckert had requested to talk to me about that same issue, but I declined to talk to it because Mr. Owen had been in attendance when I had that discussion. So if he and I would have discussed, it would have been a coma violation, and we didn't want to have that. So I requested that we add it to this so that we could have, like, Mr. Eckert ask the questions that he would want to. I also talked with Mr. Hendershot yesterday about this specifically, and if he had had discussions with the city of Gardner about it, and if there was anything that we could openly talk about without causing issues between the city and with the city of Gardner. So he said yes, he could. So what I would request is for Mr. Hendershot to possibly talk about what his discussions recently have been with what you and I talked about, and then we can go from there with with Mr. Eckert's questions and others.
Thank you. And yes, I have had conversations with the city administrator from the city of Gardner. Perhaps as you've traveled west on 199th Street, you may have noticed that the city limit signs have moved steadily to the east. They're now located approximately just west of Clare Road. And they are have annexed on both sides of the road, giving them control of that stretch of 199th. I asked their city administrator what their plans were, if you will, and they are not looking at extending any annexations further than about halfway between Clare Road and Hedge Lane. That is equivalent to the line of annexation agreement that they have with Olathe. Our current planning area extends over to Hedge Lane, so that would be consistent with our planning area. I did visit just briefly with the city administrator about the concept of an annexation agreement with the city of Gardner. As I understand, many years ago, one was developed and kind of talked about, but it never took flight. We do have an annexation agreement with the city of Olathe. Their city administrator was willing, more than welcome, to have those discussions between himself and I and our planning departments. And then if it took ground from there, was to bring that back for possible discussions here. But their annexation plans do not encroach upon our current planning areas. Does that help, Mr. Leeton?
I think that kind of kicks it off. I think that there are consequences for what they are doing on 199th Street, especially on the 199th Street corridor, and with what the county's plans were for the truck traffic coming
Yes.
east, and then that has implications about how that might possibly be developed, and also how they might just sit there and hand off the entire maintenance of that road off to them, wherever the city limits are possibly. They have some negative consequences of being so aggressive.
I also, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
I've also had discussions with the Public Works Director from Johnson County about this very topic. As you know, there are improvement projects for 199th currently have stopped at Gardner Road for this phase. Future phases were coming on to the east towards us. Our portion of that, as we sign an agreement, I believe in 2019, is scheduled for construction in 2022, approximately the third quarter or so, and that is under CARS funding. The county has paused their improvement efforts because of this annexation by the city of Gardner. They have paused their improvements on 199th from Gardner Road to Clare Road. Participation in us then is on farther, but it does not affect our project here. Where those conversations will go between those governing bodies is yet to be determined.
Well, and I would like to have a broader conversation about annexation agreements in general. Mr. Hendershot and I bumped up against our Olathe annexation agreement about a year and a half ago that really prevented us from being able to move a portion of a project forward. We met with Mayor Copeland at the time, as well as the city administrator for Olathe, and they'd indicated their desire to maintain the agreement as was, which would have resulted in a portion of a subdivision being in the city of Olathe, but the city of Spring Hill providing wastewater services. Also, I don't believe, Mr. Jenkins, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we have a lot of judicial guidance on the enforceability of annexation agreements between municipalities, do we? No. Just a yes or a no is fine.
No.
Okay. So I think a broader discussion on annexation agreements and questioning whether or not we're hog-tying ourselves and preventing us artificially from growing where we may need to. So I would like any discussion to include the efficacy of those types of agreements.
Well, and when Overland Park was being very aggressive with their unilateral annexations, you had some similar things that you dealt with Olathe. This has always been an interesting topic for us, and it's gone up to the state legislature of how they've changed how things occur. I do think that maybe if we've had that negative impact with development with the city of Olathe, then maybe we might need to reconsider that.
I want to be clear, it wasn't the negative was that it really created a lot of problems within a project. It wasn't a negative with the city of Olathe.
Oh, I get that.
Okay. I want to be clear about that. I just think what we end up doing is artificially retarding our growth.
And that's kind of where I was heading is if we're causing issues where we might have opportunities that we are going to have to forego, then we might want to rethink that agreement with the city of Olathe, or maybe have it changed, or maybe just simplify it into like a memo of understanding with an attachment of this is kind of the general area, but that doesn't mean that we can't flip past that line.
Well, I'm thinking more along the lines of before we decide that we want to engage in other annexation agreements. I'm not sure how easy it would be to unravel an existing one, but I think understanding what the potential for impact is before we decide that we want to enter into an agreement with another municipality, I think I think that's essential in order to protect the taxpayers.
If you were to look at the boundary lines of the annexation agreement with the city of Olathe, it is not a true straight line, nor would I anticipate that if something were to be developed with the city of Gardner, would it be just a straight line. They follow topography, they follow drainage basins, etc., indicating who is most apt to more feasibly provide sewers into those areas. And as those drainage basins work their way down towards Hillsdale, that would be something we'd absolutely take into effect. Our agreement with Olathe The furthest north point is 183rd. From there, it follows section lines, property lines, et cetera, but also takes into account those drainage basins. That's a very, very critical part of that, of those agreements. It is my understanding that, and Mr. Jenkins, please correct me if I speak wrong here, but it's my understanding that annexation agreements are not enforceable in a court. However, they are expected or anticipated to be honored among cities once entered into and following that. So,
I think Mr. Jenkins would like to add something.
That's absolutely correct.
thank you.
I think that maybe though, having some of a simpler tool that provides maybe some ability for for the developers to kind of plan of dealing with who would I actually need to deal with on this property might be something that we need to discuss, with them. And that's why I say maybe a memo of understanding and maybe just a simple attachment of this is roughly where it's at.
And I'm
Yeah.
hesitant to do anything that binds the hands of a future council. That's really what my other concern is, because we don't quite know what the lay of the land's gonna look like and where our best opportunities may be. So even a memorandum of understanding, we've seen what the challenges that has presented with the Case Island corridor.
Yeah.
So, I think handling it on a case-by-case basis as projects come up is probably a better way to do it than tying our hands on an entire area.
If we just have something, does our planning area go out to that line so that
Goes out to hedge.
Ours goes out to Hedge Lane,
Yes.
yes. And it's a true straight line along Hedge Lane. I can give you an example of how we work with Miami County. When the growth area was dissolved, then we came up with a boundary line of what we call areas of interest. And anything that would be inside that line, Miami County coordinates with the city. Do we have an interest in annexing this property? And it's a back and forth between the planners and staff at that level. And perhaps that's something that we could approach with Gardner, something with a little less rigidity to it than an or the annexation agreement, but
Maybe something along those lines, because I want to be clear, I support what you're saying. We've got to start moving west. We're gonna need some help from KDOT to do that, but I think that approach might be really
I'm not saying that we have to have a memo of understanding or this or that tool. What I want to make sure though is that our staff has the ability to work with Gardner and have a planning tool so that you don't have, what was it, Coffee Creek up in Olathe and Overland Park where they got into a fight over that and it flipped from one city to the other in an annexation agreement. And that caused a lot of bad blood between the two cities. This was back in the early 2000s.
I think that was Overland Park and Leawood.
Was it Leawood?
I thought. But in any case.
Try to have a planning tool so that we don't have bad blood developed between us and an adjoining city though too.
Right.
So whatever that tool is I'm okay with. I'm not saying that I have to have a memo of understanding. What I'm looking for is something that we can provide a general idea to a developer so that when they look at what's going on, they know who at least to talk with. And,
what I might suggest, Mr. Leeton, then is that Mr. Burton and I work with the planning department and city administration and city Gardner and just bounce some ideas around, come back with a report as to where that landed. I say in visiting with the city administrator, he's more than welcome to sit down and visit about a variety of options that may be available. Because it's all about working with our neighbors.
and another thing that comes in play with this is the ridge line out there for the natural fall of land for sanitary sewers and to make sure that makes sense. Especially now since Johnson County wastewater and the county is backing off of trying to do any type of sewers out in that area.
Correct.
So developers are going to have two options that they're going to really be coming to talk to. It's either the city of Gardner or it's going to be us in those areas if they're really wanting to do some type of development. And that needs to make sense from from the natural lay of the ground in the fall. So that's what's going to have to make sense on there too, that we don't try to service something and then have to put in lift stations.
Sure.
Does that?
That answers a lot of my questions, just that general discussion right there. I didn't know if it was kind of an encroachment or a land grab that they were working their way east. I didn't know the rationale behind it, but I think the more we talk about it, the more I understand it.
And I think really what we're talking about is mechanisms to prevent that, at least prevent the perception of it. But I just want to be cautious not to do anything that cuts us off from opportunities
Right.
that make sense for the community.
Right.
All right, any more discussion on that? No, all right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Leeton, for leading that.
Mayor, just as a point of guidance, do we proceed with having those conversations?
Oh, I think there's consensus for that.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
I just want to be clear.
I would like you, though, to plug in with Mr. Leeton and Mr. Owen and have some interim discussions so that we make sure that we're kind of going in the direction that they want.
Very good.
And then they can come back to the council as a whole and report back.
Yes, sir.
So, all right, thank you, Mr. Hendershot. Next is our donation policy, and Mr. Hendershot, you were going to talk to us about that.
Good evening again. From time to time, we have an opportunity to discuss with residents the potentials of donations. As you're well aware, we had a very sizable donation from the Knable family for Veterans Park. We've had other inquiries into donations for departments, projects, et cetera. And as we continue our efforts to look for funding for different projects, donations do come up. For that reason, I felt it was important, and my management team agreed, that we develop a donation policy, one that will help guide not only our efforts internally, but help guide the residents. The draft that you have before you this evening, and I'm going to have to take this off just for a second here. The purpose of this draft is to establish a formal process for acceptance and documentations of donations that would be made to the city. It's intended to provide guidance to an individual, a community group, or business that wishes to make a donation, and also to ensure that donations are accepted in a responsible, transparent manner and consistent with the city's strategic goals. What the draft goes on to outline then of specific objectives is to establish those relationships with donors, to enrich the community by efficiently managing donations, to generate revenue to fund new and existing facilities, projects, programs, and activities for the benefit of the city and its residents, and to work with nonprofit organizations whose missions may support the city's strategic goals. There are some definitions contained within this draft, and a couple just to highlight for purposes of the discussion. A donation or gift, it means any monetary or cash contribution, endowments, personal property or real property, financial securities, equipment in kind, goods or services, or any other assets that the city has accepted and for which the donor has not received any goods or services in return. And for the purposes of this policy, a donation and a gift are synonymous. A couple other definitions. You'll hear me refer in a little bit to restricted and unrestricted donations. A restricted donation per this draft means donations designated at a donor's request for a particular purpose, location, or project. An unrestricted donation, it means a donation to the city without any limitations being placed upon its use. General principles of donations that are discussed in this policy, there are several, and I'll highlight some of those. Donations do not become the property of the city until they're accepted by the city. Only city officials authorized by this policy may accept donations on behalf of the city. That's protecting our staff that may be in contact with residents and giving them the guidance on how to recommend that those go forward if they're not listed as one of those folks. All donations are to be evaluated by the city prior to acceptance to determine whether the donation is in the city's best interest and is consistent with the applicable city laws, policies, ordinances, and resolutions. The city does not provide any legal, accounting, tax, or other advice to donors. The city shall determine whether an expenditure of city funds, either by direct outlay or of city funds, or the use of city forces and material is associated with or required by the acceptance of the donation prior to acceptance. The donation must be used for official city business and not for political activities or other personal business. The donor may restrict a donation for a particular use, location, or project, but may not designate by name which city official may use the donation. The city shall comply with all applicable laws and regulations of the IRS regarding the acceptance of donations. Then the beneficiary department head will work with the finance director or his or her designee to determine the appropriate accounting for that donation. A couple of very common types of donations. The first is in the form of cash or cash and real or personal property. Donations of real property, those would be routed through the community development department, who would determine if the approximate value of the donation and request the city council consider approval to accept that donation. Community Development Department would submit its report to the mayor and the city council in regard to the proposed donation. That report would include, but not necessarily limited to, what is the appraised value of the donation, what expenditures or maintenance obligations for the city would be associated with the donation, potential liabilities associated with the donation such as hazardous conditions or environmental concerns, whether the donation has any special restrictions, and if so, if those restrictions are acceptable to the city. Any recommendations as to whether the city may wish to impose any conditions upon acceptance of that donation, whether the donation is in the city's best interest, and finally, acceptance of the donation would be consistent with applicable city laws, policies, ordinances, and resolutions. When it comes to donations of cash and personal property, the city administrator would evaluate whether that donation falls into one of the following. Is it in the best interest and consistent with applicable city laws, policies, ordinances, and resolutions? Have any special restrictions, and if so, are those acceptable? Whether the donation creates an obligation of the city to make an immediate or initial city expenditure which has not been included in the approved city budget, and whether the donation creates a new, one-time, or ongoing general maintenance obligation. With regards to those cash or personal properties donations of less than $50,000, those can be accepted by the city administrator once those have gone through the review process. Any proposed donation of $50,000 or greater would come before the city council, and a resolution would be submitted to you folks for consideration. Once action is taken on the donation, the city administrator would give notice of his or her decision to accept or reject the donation, or the city council's decision, as we talked about with the greater amounts, to accept and reject. The city administrator would also always submit a notice of acceptance or rejection of any donation to the mayor and city council, finance director, city clerk, and appropriate department head. Mayor and council, I think this draft adequately provides transparency on donation processes. I think it lays out some very good guidelines for folks as far as staff and for the public, and I'm available for questions.
I think the only area where I struggle just a little bit is the personal property valued at under $50,000. I'm fine with the process for cash donations being in the purview of the city administrator, but personal property of that value and just ensuring that taking all of the current people out of it, just looking at it strictly from a procedural perspective, making certain that it truly is in the best interest of all of the taxpayers to take whatever that piece of personal property may be. For example, a city administrator may think that an antiquated fire engine is an excellent addition to the city. It has a retail value of $30,000, but the question becomes, where do we put it? How are we going to use it? Does it create an attractive nuisance? Those are the kind of things that I would be concerned about from the personal property side.
Okay.
On the cash side, I'm obviously fine with that.
Okay.
That's just my 2 cents on the whole package.
one thing that I just wanted a little bit more understanding on is you're saying that appraisals, who's gonna be that cost of the appraisal for? Is it gonna be the city's appraisal cost?
That's a very good point. It's not addressed in here. I would assume start with what the county tax appraised value is, and if there was a discussion there, then, we would.
Typically, if somebody's making a donation and they're looking to receive some tax benefit from it, they will have already had it appraised. I mean, it's usually upon the donor to say, hey, here's this gift, it's valued at whatever.
I just think we might want to tighten that up a little bit of
And
that.
we could do
put that onus on the donor.
We could do
I'm
some.
not saying it necessarily has to be announced, but let's tighten up and see where we would like to head with that. And then the other one would be is similarly for personal property that gets donated. Like you said, it's a fire truck. And you think it's 30,000, but maybe because it's depreciated, it's only worth 15,000 because it needs a new engine and new tires.
Mrs. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but this isn't an area I practice it. Donations to a city even tax deductible in some way, or?
It depends. It can be,
Okay,
yes.
Do we-
Federally, I don't know about state.
do we need to set up a entity that's tax deductible in order to receive it, or?
It would be a benefit to the donor if we set up an entity to receive all of our donations, and that's easy to do because the city can set up a nonprofit, and then still administer that under city guidelines.
And do you think that might encourage donations if we did that?
I am all for encouraging donations.
So-
I've been trying to get us on the donation track since I started. But yes, and that's not hard to do, and I think it would benefit the donor because then we can issue a little receipt so they can put that towards all of their tax purposes. So that's really the best benefit for them.
So, how does everybody feel about having Mr. Hendershot and Mr. Jenkins pursue that so that we can maximize donations?
I agree, but I have a question. For example, the money that a private citizen put towards that Veterans Park, was that tax deductible because he named what it was gonna go to?
Well,
Or- I
naming
mean,
what
that's
it
what we're
goes
trying
to
to understand.
isn't the determining factor.
Okay.
So
Okay.
you can do a directed donation. Whether or not it was tax deductible, I don't know.
Right.
Okay.
And again, that's why we identified in there that we're not the tax experts and we're not,
Right.
but I can work with Ms. Landis. She has experience in cities, with charitable donations, and Mr. Jenkins, and we can see what's available.
I can tell you how we've avoided that issue on the Mayor's Christmas Tree Fund is that we've only selected beneficiaries who are 501c3s, so we're just the pass-through, so that those donations are generally tax deductible.
Okay.
But for these larger donations just to the city proper, I think that would be an excellent idea, Mrs. Hughes.
I'd like us to move one step further and go towards crowdfunding and put in, people can donate at their will.
Baby steps.
Oh, no, come on now. I'm trying here. Especially on the utilities. I'd really like to see us move forward with at least roundup on utilities.
Yes, I would
and things
too.
like that. I really would like some help for our people who need and are asking us for utility assistance.
Okay. I'd be happy to keep digging into this then, Mayor, and
Yes, please.
come back at a future meeting with an additional report then.
Well, I'd like you to come back at the next meeting with a recommendation on the formation of a 501c3, and then I would presume, Mr. Jenkins, that much like the Golf Corporation, that the city council would serve as the board of directors on the 501c3.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I think we've got that resolved.
Mayor, may I make one comment?
Certainly. Could you go to the lectern? Thank you.
In working with the city administrator, I've done some preliminary legal work on this, and there is a legal issue, a potential legal issue, that there's some cases that hold that the city governing body, the legislative body, to what extent can it delegate its legislative authority? It clearly can delegate to the staff administrative authority, but when you start delegating to the city staff legislative decisions, specifically what money they're going to receive, that may be an issue. So I just wanted to raise that as a preliminary issue that we may want to consider.
I think moving the personal property out of there certainly offers some clarity, because a cash donation is different. But obviously, if somebody wanted to make a cash donation for a purpose that may violate public policy, you're right, that's certainly problematic.
Thank you.
All right. Any other discussion? All right, Ms. Landis, you're going to walk us through a projected revenue adjustment on our spending plan, correct? You have the floor.
Am I going backwards? Sorry. Okay, here we go. Okay, so we have a couple of meetings ago, we started, or a couple of months ago, actually, we started providing a spending plan update at the second meeting of each month, and with the idea that we would have a little bit better idea towards the end of the month. This happened to be one of those months where the sales tax distribution didn't come in before today, and the property tax distribution didn't come in before today, so I have created more of a hybrid report for you. So it's some of what you heard last month and a little bit of what I've projected beginning this month. So anyway, bear with me. Hopefully by October, we'll kind of be back on track with our dates and be able to get you a really good update then.
To clarify, that's information that we receive from other entities. It's not available due to anything that we did.
Yes, absolutely. The property tax reporting comes to us from each of the counties, and the sales tax reporting comes to us from the state. The purpose of the spending plan, or what we've put together here, is not to replace the monthly budget reports and those items that you already get at the end of each month, but to bring you just an idea and update us to where we think we're going to end this year, or some projections, because of the COVID situation and the impact that it's made on the sources of revenue that the city relies heavily on. So we do include in here some adjustments that we'll go over that we made early in the year, and we've identified some areas where we can consider if we should land in a position where we need to, that we didn't expect to be. We do have, right now, I'm looking at a combined impact overall between what I'm considering impacted by sales tax in both the general fund and the county. We have a special county sales tax fund that we contribute the portion of the most recent county sales tax initiative that goes into, and that fund is used to fund either projects, items, and capital projects, and or capital purchases. And so those are the two areas that we are most heavily relying on. We've included in here also a review of the debt service fund and the water and sewer fund, just to keep you up to date on those two, or those three. Some of the impacts here for revenue is the varying degree of impact from sales tax, of course, some delayed municipal court revenue, delinquent property tax and motor vehicle collections, and the miscellaneous revenue sources. We do have also identified some unbudgeted increases of overtime, legal fees, and project costs. And then we've gone through an estimated or delinquency for special assessments, which right now we're estimating at about 5%. Again, when I see the reports for September's property tax distributions from the counties are very small, considering the large dollars that we bring in for ad valorem taxes, motor vehicle taxes, all of those. But we will have a much better idea after we are able to report or record those. And then some deferred utility sales revenue. Nothing has really changed on this screen, so I don't think I'm going to go through them item by item. I did even condense them from last month so that you're not hearing the same story over and over again. But I think the point is as a reminder, is that we had started the year, or in March, April timeframe, we identified that we would freeze open positions. We did have some other positions that have been vacant either earlier in the year and or are still vacant that we're looking to fill, but we just have not yet filled them. Both of those items produce a savings in what we had budgeted, so those are included here as an offset to what we think the what we might call a deficit might be this year. And in addition to, we had some unbudgeted expenditures, which I mentioned earlier, as well as we had the offset of the aquatic center being closed for the season. So right now we're looking at about $381,000 of what I might call identified budgetary, I don't like the word savings, but that's the offset that we've identified in our expenditures overall that would offset that 350,000 that we were looking to, that we think we might be short. The other item that's mentioned here is the delay of the comprehensive plan update, which at the beginning of the year, one of the items that was in our plan for this year was to move ahead with an update to our comprehensive plan. That is 50% funded from that county sales tax initiative, and so we were waiting to kind of see where we're at. At this point, we have collected enough in that fund to move ahead with that project, and so that is something that we may consider, you all can consider, or we can consider at the staff level moving ahead with that project. And the other 50% is from both of the utility funds. I did add a screen in here to talk a little bit about sales tax. So all along we've said, okay, sales tax is going to be, we think it's going to be 40% down. We think it's going to be 25% down. And what's really difficult for us is we have three main sources of sales tax receipts, and all of them move a little differently. So what I did here is just kind of show you, I didn't compare this to budget, but I wanted to show you where it was compared to last year, because a lot of us are looking at, okay, well, not just what did we budget for sales tax this year, but where are we compared to last year, and how are we going to forecast that for next year? And so just a comparison here. So city sales tax for Spring Hill, both sales and use tax is up. You're going to see in all three categories for both the city and both counties that use tax is up. That means people are buying more things and having them delivered to their home as opposed to going to the store, which makes sense. Miami County is also up in their sales tax, which about 10%, city's up about 11%. Johnson County is just right at where they were in 2019 so far. To give you an idea, we get about 50% of our sales tax is from city sales tax, city sales and use. About 35% comes from Johnson County and about 15% from Miami County. So proportionately, it might look like in these numbers that we're up and there's no problem. But when you look at Johnson County being level with their last year amounts and that they contribute 35% of the total, we do still have to be cautious. What is difficult here is that I can no longer really say we're 15% down, we're 25% down, because we might be about 100% of where we were last year. We might be 100% of what we budgeted, but we still have 3 months to go. As a reminder, sales tax is delayed by 2 months, so we're right now looking at 2 months back. We won't know what happens in November and December until January and February. So again, this will likely need to roll into the beginning of the year, paying attention to next year's budgeted revenues. The additional items that we had identified, these likely won't need to be put into place, but we had identified some additional areas where early on we had said, hey, we don't want to scramble in the fourth quarter to come back and cut some expenditures, because by then operations has already moved too far along. So we had identified these areas. There's about $240,000 worth of other items that we can move ahead with should we need that. And we may want to consider some of these for next year as well, should we have somewhat of a delayed start into 2021. This is just a quick overview of the debt service fund, the water utility, and the wastewater utility. There really isn't much change here actually there's no change here from the debt service fund or water utility fund in what I'm presenting to you. In the debt service fund, the item that we were most concerned about was the special assessment delinquency. We're still sitting about 5%. We'll know more after we see the receipts from this month. The water utility is sitting pretty stable where we figured it would be, and the wastewater utility is really done well. Actually, I'm sorry, I think that I need to adjust my numbers there. Oh no, we'll have an additional amount of $341,000 over what we think that where we might land at the end of the year. But a lot of that is contributed to the amount that we rolled over from last year, and also the system development fees, which right now we're $109,000 over what we budgeted for this year. We budget those system development fees conservatively in both of those funds, not knowing exactly what might come in. Really, that's all I have for you this evening. Do you have questions? I know it was a quick run through, a lot of the same information you heard last month, but I'm available for questions if you have them.
Well, I like the tempered approach. I mean, yes, it looks good now, but we're looking at July numbers. We're probably still seeing some stimulus money being spent. People are not really going outside of the community for a lot of different activities, so they're probably spending a little bit more here or spending it in areas where the use tax kicks in. So I think that maintaining a very conservative approach going forward is our continued mission. Would everybody agree?
Very much so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Ms.
Okay,
Landis.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from Ms. Landis? All right.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. This takes us to announcements and reports. As a reminder, for those of you who don't have it on your calendar yet, the Chamber Annual Dinner is November 10th. That, I think those plans are continuing to develop. I know that the Chamber CEO, Sharon Mitchell, is working really hard to see how that event might shake out. I know we've talked about a couple of different things where maybe we have a group of people at the Meadowlark Event Center and we have another group here and kind of simulcast that, have people who can participate via Zoom and have a meal delivered to them so that they can still participate. A lot of different great ideas that she has going out there. But if you don't have that on your calendar, please do. Madam Clerk, at our next meeting, can we talk about our November and December schedule? The second meeting in November always falls on Thanksgiving, and of course, the second meeting in December always falls in that week between our week of Christmas. So we typically don't have meetings on those days, so planning ahead, keeping some Thursdays open in the event that we need to call a special meeting will be important for everybody. Lastly, I just wanted to read everybody a letter that I received from the Johnson County District Attorney's Office. Dear Mr. Ellis, on March 2nd, 2020, you made a decision through special counsel to refer the above referenced matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation. The matter referenced is allegation of criminal conduct relating to the City of Spring Hill's procurement of broadband internet services. There was concern regarding the integrity of the city's broadband selection process, and it was alleged that a city employee accepted a bribe and conspired with another city employee during the selection process. The scope of the investigation was limited to whether any criminal violations occurred during the selection of Allo Communications. Interviews were conducted and related documents and emails provided by the special counsel were reviewed. The investigation has been completed and the district attorney's office found no evidence substantiating any violations of KSA 21-6001A2, bribery, or Kansas statutes annotated 215302A, conspiracy, or any other violations of criminal statutes. Therefore, no further action will be taken by this office. Respectfully, Stephen M. Howe, Johnson County District Attorney. I have asked Ms. Schubert to post this letter tonight online, and this is the result that I anticipated and the result that I believe that most others in the community anticipated. What I said at the start of that was, if there was criminal activity found, we would prosecute it to the full extent of the law. And if there wasn't, then it's time to move this community forward. That time is now, and I look forward to the council's direction on what our next steps are. I have nothing further. Mr. Owen?
Nothing at this time.
Mr. Leeton?
Nothing.
Mrs. Hughes?
I hope with that letter that Mr. Hendershot can reach out to Allo tomorrow and let them know that this is what the finding was, because they put us on hold as far as communications until after that decision was made. And so we'd really like to be able to start those talks up again.
Is that the consensus of the council to move forward?
Yes.
Very good. You have your marching orders, Mr. Hendershot. Anything else, Ms. Hughes?
That's all.
All right, very good. Mr. Eckert?
Nothing to report, sir.
All right, Mr. Graves?
Tomorrow is the community-wide Zero Reasons Why Day. For those that aren't familiar with Zero Reasons Why, it is a very important initiative, especially with everything going on right now. It's a student-led initiative, and they have those difficult conversations, or those conversations that are difficult to have. I've worked with them on a number of different things, story days, things like that. Very proud of this group. Tomorrow, I would encourage everyone to wear your Zero Reasons Why shirts if you have them, wristbands, whatever, and just continue to thank them for the work that they're doing, because much needed during this time.
Excellent. It is an excellent reminder. Before we move on to staff reports, I would like to extend my thanks and the thanks of our community to District Attorney Howe, and most importantly to his investigator, who I think did yeoman's work over the last 6 months to get us to this point. Mr. Hendershot.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have just three quick. I've been in communications with you on the issues that we discovered as a result of Mr. Boswell's notification of some areas of concern. There were 13 areas, and all this information is online. There were 13 areas, and we've addressed 11 of those. One of the remaining one on weeds is one that we have to go physically remove a fence to get the weeds down, and then we're looking at the vehicles that are at the wastewater plant. So those have progressed, most of which of those 13 were done within the first few days of that last meeting. We do have a Hometown Holidays Committee that has been meeting. They are looking for how can we continue the Hometown Holidays celebration in a safe and a responsible manner. And I believe they are coming up with some very unique ways. It will be a little different than what the community is used to in the past. But Hometown Holidays is scheduled to go on as always every year, with some differences due to the pandemic. So to keep everyone safe, but yet celebrate the holiday season.
Well, and I do think, Madam Clerk, correct me if I'm wrong, we've talked about a virtual tree lighting where myself and the person lighting the tree will be present, but we would just live stream that.
Yes.
So that's one of the things that we're looking at changing. So I think that 1 year deviating from all of us coming together certainly is not going to impact the season, and I don't think it's going to impact Hometown Holidays going forward. So
I agree. The last thing is our crews have been meeting and going through their annual snow removal planning sessions. At the next meeting, I would expect a resolution adopting a little bit different emergency snow routes as we analyze those every year as we do and bring those forward. But we are gearing up for that because it is the last part of September, so it won't be long and those crews will be needed. But we are moving forward in that manner.
terrific. Did you have something, Mr. Lee?
Well, that does bring up a question. We were potentially looking at deferring costs for like salt spreaders and things like that. I'd like to know the date of, once we get to a certain point of deferring that we could actually get ourselves in trouble with actually like buying anything that we might actually need for the season. So I want to make sure is that we don't.
Okay.
I want to make sure that we don't defer something and then get ourselves in a pickle where we deferred it too long and now we can't get it in.
I understand.
We need it.
From an equipment standpoint, we're in good shape. It's the salt and sand that we're looking at our inventory and what we need to do there. So.
And that was what my real concern was about, was the salt and sand.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Salt spreader is worthless if it has nothing in it.
I understand. That's all, sir.
All right, Madam Clerk.
No report.
Ms. Landis.
I have a couple of things. One, just to respond to Mrs. Hughes' request earlier to give an update on the CARES Act monies through Johnson County. Just a quick, I guess, brief update. The way that the CARES funding is working is that there's partial funding through Miami County, partial funding through Johnson County. They're both operating from two different pots of money. Miami County through the Spark funds administered by the state. Johnson County through its own appropriation that they received, and they're managing it through a company that they've hired as a consultant on it. Both of them offering reimbursements for expenses we had to submit to them as proposed projects. We've talked about that before. It was about $12 million that we submitted in the form of 18 project proposals. And last week, or I want to say it was the first part of last week, we got some communication back from them that where they had prioritized. So the ultimate goal is for them to assign a risk, and risk being these are federal dollars, they're federal grant dollars, and you have to follow the federal grant guidelines. And so they looked at our projects and assigned a risk as to do they qualify for the funding under those guidelines. So we received some feedback back on those. There were 5 of our projects where in that low to medium category where they basically said you may go ahead and move ahead with those. But we had lots of projects where there was some question marks and they had further questions. So we're preparing some updates to them so that they can further consider some of those other projects as well. We have not yet moved ahead with the first 5 that were initially approved because we'll want to prioritize overall, I believe, once we find out if the others would be moved into one of those acceptable categories. The one thing that does tie our hands just a little bit is that each of the cities were, shortly after we all submitted our request, each of the cities were given a cap for the amount of dollars that you are eligible for under this, what we're calling a CRF program. And the cap for Spring Hill is $204,000. And that is based on our population in Johnson County. And then that is spread as a percentage over the total funds that were available. So you'll see that some cities had a large amount. Obviously, they're bigger and they reside their entire population in the same county. Miami County doesn't have the same exact program on their side, but there may be some opportunity for us to offset some of those expenditures through the programs that they're administering as well. So that's an update. We don't have any solid let's march ahead items yet, but we will be working on those in the next 1 to 2 weeks, and we'll get something back to them hopefully next week and hopefully hear something shortly after that. Do you have any questions on that?
Well, with school being in full swing, I wanted to make sure that some of the projects that we thought we would afford anyway, as reimbursement, we're moving forward. I think we talked about some hot spots. I know we budgeted and asked for a lot of them, but if we had a few to start with, and I think we talked about the expenditure for widening or pushing out our Wi-Fi at our buildings so that they go out a little bit farther. That was one of the things we were talking about. That wouldn't actually cost that much, especially the Wi-Fi we're already paying for.
So I'm glad that you brought that up. So in their initial review, anything that was internet-based or community project-based, they considered to be part of the phase 2 funding, which is not yet out. And so these initial funds were really considered reimbursement for the initial combat of COVID. And so what we tried to explain, and we are going to, as part of our explanation back to them, will be that, yes, we understand that internet in general might be one of the options that other communities need some assistance with, but Spring Hill has a special situation and a unique situation, which is why we wanted to make sure that we had those available. So that's part of the work that we're doing, is to enhance our initial request to make sure that they do understand why we feel like it runs into the first phase pot of money as opposed to being pushed back to the phase 2 dollars.
When's the phase 2 deadline?
I don't think that's been determined yet. I think they put together a strike team, and I am unsure of exactly what that timeline is. Do you know, John?
It's the phase 2 task force is underway now. We'll be participating in that as well.
And there's a phone call. They have weekly phone calls, I believe, as updates. So that's something we can find out, get more information on.
Ms. Landis, I'd like you to keep an eye on what the per resident dollar amount is that we're receiving relative to what our sister communities are receiving. I understand the redistribution of tax dollars around the area, but our residents, a lot of them are leaving here during the day. They're going to work in other communities in Johnson County where they're probably buying their fuel, maybe picking up groceries, having lunch, spending tax dollars that are benefiting those communities. So it doesn't necessarily look like we're contributing the same amount as other communities are, but the dollar amount that you gave is a relatively small per capita amount. And I want to make certain that we're fighting for our fair share for our residents as well. So if you could keep an eye on that and keep us posted as to what ours looks like relative to other communities in Johnson County, I don't think anybody up here has a problem making a few telephone calls.
That's a great point. We'll, Mr. Hendershot and I will work together on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, feel free to put me on the calling tree.
Sure.
I had one other item. You mentioned the Roundup program and donations, and I'm glad you brought that up. We've been working on that internally. Staff has been, and it seems like that might be a really easy concept and very easy with our electronic system for making payments. However, what we found is that it's a 2-part thing, and so we're happy to be able to move it ahead. And there's one small challenge that we're still working on, which is the ability to allow those residents who, or those customers who pay by a recurring monthly payment where they have already a set payment either coming out of their bank account or already scheduled to come out of their online payment account. And when you talk about round up, the way that the system handles it is it would attach that to the bill that's due. And in order to do that, we would need some sort of an agreement from them that yes, in fact, they do want that particular amount to come out of their account. So that's the part that we have not yet been able to nail down, but the rest of the program I think will be easy to get up and running. And we certainly don't want people to shy away from making those recurring monthly payments, because obviously that's a lot less administrative burden on our staff to process the manual payments. But we also want to make sure they have the opportunity to contribute to not just the utility assistance roundup, but if we were to decide that we wanted to at some point do the mayor's tree fund in there, if we wanted to add any other future donation option for them to have, we want that program to be in place so it makes sense for everyone. So that just a little update, but hopefully we'll get something out to you shortly on that as well.
Terrific.
And that's all I had. Thank you.
Anything for Ms. Landis? Very good. Mr. Jenkins?
Mayor, may I approach these?
Yes.
At the September 10th, 2020 City Council meeting, I was directed to submit a report to the governing body in response to questions raised by Mr. Riffle during citizen participation relating to memorandum prepared by me pertaining to or including but not limited to the authority and powers of the city council members, city administrator, and president of the council. I anticipate that report will be completed and submitted to the governing body by the October 8th, 2020 City Council meeting.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Henson?
No report.
All right. Mr. Burton?
No report, sir.
All right. I think that takes care of business for tonight. Would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. We are.